Hi, good day. I welcome you to this IT Auditing Masterclass, our series 3 in the series. So, in the previous series, in series 1, we introduced you to IT auditing, where we discuss about understanding the basis of IT auditing, what you need to know as regards to IT auditing to help you in your career. We discuss it in that series. Also, we also discuss about types of IT audit that engagements that you can undertake either within your organization or probably for your audit client. So it depends on the engagement you are undertaking. And same thing, under that same series, we discuss about what is the function or the responsibility of an IT auditor to an organization or to your audit client. Is expected of you as an IT auditor, and how can you go about carry out your audit engagement services to your client or to your organization. And after that, we also discuss about these IT audit skills that you must possess for you to become a better IT auditor to your organization or to your audit clients. So, at the end of that series, we rounded it up with differences between information technology and information system. So, we try to differentiate so that you can understand anytime you are making a statement, you are talking about IT or you are talking about information system. And that's why in different organizations or probably to different IT auditor, you will see or you will notice that the nomenclature given to them will be different. So some will say IT auditor, though some will write it in full information technology auditor. And in some instances, you will see IS auditor. Why they write it in full in some instances, information systems auditor. So, whichever nomenclature is actually given to an IT auditor, your function that you have to perform for your organization or to your audit client still remain the same. However, the scope of engagement you are undertaking at any point in time will differentiate the action plan that you are going to undertake, or probably the audit procedures you are going to adopt to carry out that same engagement. But in a nutshell, nomenclature attached to your function does not actually reduce what you are expected to perform as an IT auditor, or probably remove some of the functionalities, critical functionalities that you must perform at all time. So in the second series, we discuss about IT standard and framework, where we actually touch some of these significant frameworks that we know today, like NIST, Cybersecurity Framework, and also we look about COBIT 2019 version, and then we also, make mention of ISO, that is Information Security Management System, which is ISMS part of it, ISO 27001 series. And then we also talk about IT, that is Information Technology Infrastructure Library, that can also be applied, while you are carrying out your auditing. So we also look at how important is IT to your environment or to your organization, because in some organizations they are information technology inclined. That is, most of their processes are IT driven. While in some organizations they adopt majorly, maybe 90% of their processes are manually documented, but financial information is being, reporting or probably imputed through a core financial application. So in these instances, so we have different levels of importance of IT to different organizations. So it depends on how all the levels of information technology are adopted by your management or in your organization. So that goes a long way. And that is why we mentioned that you have to understand your control environment, your IT environment. So it's very critical. And also, in that sense, we also discussed briefly about COSO frameworks as a forms of internal control framework that can be adopted in different organizations. to develop that particular organizations. So we also discuss about IT governance framework in that particular series. And we also discuss about the IT governance structures. So how your information technology department is being structured within your organization. So do you have a chief digital officer? Do you have CIO, that is Chief Information Officer? And do you have other functions that cascaded from that particular main functions down to different functions within your organization? In some organizations, you only have one person that represents information technology department. And if that happen, how how are you going to try to evaluate the controls that's supposed to have a dual control within your environment? So when we get to that particular area, we are going to actually discuss more about that in today's series, which is our third series. So actually we're supposed to have pass through this third series. However, a lot of events actually takes place. So I have a lot of things on my plate to clear out, be it from school examination, office activities, and the likes. But thank God, here we are. In today's series, we are going to be discussing about developing an IT audit plan. So in this series, we are going to be looking at majorly risk assessment, because as an IT auditor, you have to be very conversant how to assess risk within your IT environment. The assessment of risk you are going to carry out will determine which critical area or functions within your organization you need to actually audit. Don't forget, every processes, every area, every function within your organizations are auditable. Okay, so don't worry. Let's move on. By the time we get there, we are going to discuss what limits you not to be able to audit all those auditable functions. We are going to discuss about it. So, due to that constraint, you have to identify the critical area that you need to prioritize. And that is main reason you have to carry out a risk assessment for all your IT functions, or your let me say your IT environment in your organizations, or for your client environment, before you can carry out your audit. For those who are in consulting services, this area, it might be evaluated by your manager, but having that knowledge won't be lost, because as time goes by, you are going to also move to maybe an internal audit function that you have to perform this function yourself. So knowing it will actually be a great asset to you, will add value to your understanding, and develop more in your career line. And again, we are going to be discussing about type of risk that is applicable. Then we'll also try to understand what is the difference between vulnerability and threat, and how do they occur, who have control over vulnerability and who have controls over threats, and how this can be mitigated. Then we're also going to be discussing about the risk assessment that is applicable to your own function, which is information technology audit. Don't forget, there is no such thing as IT risk. You understand? So when we get there, we discuss. Then we are going to be now discussing about how to develop your IT audit plan itself. What are the processes? What are the steps that you have to undertake to develop your IT audit plan that is going to formulate an integrated part of IT audit plan for your organization? Even if you are in a consulting services, don't forget, you are performing a strata function of the auditing services that your organization is rendering to your clients. So you still need to embed yourself with the auditors, that is the financial auditors, that is going to carry out the review of the financial statement of that particular organization. Don't forget, for preparing the financial statement of that particular client, they have to place a certain reliance on information technology. That is, the core financial application they are using is being powered by an IT infrastructure like the servers, database, and application. So if something went wrong on this infrastructure, maybe due to unauthorized access on that infrastructure, it means that the information that is being produced by that core financial application that management is now place a reliance on, that okay, yeah, this financial application we are using have provide or has produced a financial statement for them to place a reliance on. If unauthorized access is being placed from the back end and modify or altered any of those information, it means that the management of that organizations will be arriving or deducing on wrong information, and as a result their own decision making will also be wrong. And that is why we as an internal IT auditor, we are involved in that same process to help them look for the risk that might cascade, that might result from using of information technology. You understand? So then after, we are going to be discussing about summary of what we discussed in this particular series. Please, let's get started. Here, we are looking at the developing the IT audit plan, the risk assessment part of it. According to the Institute of Internal Auditing Standard, though we have 2024 series now and standard now, IPPF, it says that the chief audit executive within your organization, let me say an internal audit function now, because in this case we are talking about the internal audit function. However, this nomenclature, when we are talking about the chief risk audit executive in your organization, this might mean different nomenclatures. I have seen different organizations that doesn't have chief audit executive, except in a big organization. So if that happens in your organization, this function might be a team lead for internal audit. It might be HOD, head of department of internal audit, or it might be a group internal auditor. So whichever nomenclature is used, just take note that here what we are referring to is that the person that is leading internal audit within your organization must establish a risk-based plan. That is a risk-based audit plan for the organization for a year. Don't forget, note this risk-based. And that is the essence of talking about this risk assessment. Because you can't just use, if your audit plan is not risk-based, what it means is that you use your own judgment to just look at your environment that, okay, let's audit this, let's audit this, let's audit this. Without carrying out a risk assessment, your judgment might be wrong. And it might also be biased. So you might be biased based on the fact that maybe based on the audits you have carried out in the process in the past, and you just feel like, okay, let's audit this process again. But carry out risk assessments will make the process seamless and make it a risk base, in the sense that you prioritize what you have identified as a risk. You have to identify the critical risk area, the high risk area within your organization, the moderate, that is the medium risk area, and the low risk area. And then you now rank all these things based on the available resources within your organization. So let me just go back here. That is, looking at the planning for the internal audit within your organization, your chief audit executive, CAE, must establish a risk-based plan to determine the priorities of the internal audit activities, which must be consistent with your organization's goals and objectives. Don't forget, every organization has an objective to achieve, right? They have a goal set for themselves. Okay, let's assume your organization wants to become a leading IT providers in Nigeria. That is the goal, right? This goal cannot just happen without a supporting processes. There must be a lot of processes internally that support these goals. And that is why we have operational processes. And at management levels, they have to develop policies that guide these goals, achievements, and objectives. And along the line, different functional units within your organization We also have to develop their own SOP that guides their day-to-day operational services or activities. And because we are looking at a strategic goal that has been set by the board of directors, cascaded that same function down to your management, the management will now break down these processes into achievable milestones, because this goal might not be achieved within 1 year, right? It might be a long-term project, a long-term goals that need to be achieved within 10 to 15 years. Within 10 to 15 years. And if this needs to be achieved in the next 15 years, year on year, there will be a plan to achieve each of these particular goal that has been set by your management. So that's why we are saying that for your chief audit executive, your HOD of internal audit, your group internal auditor, or your audit team lead has to ensure and establish a risk-based plan that must be operated year on year to determine priorities area of your internal audit functions and activities that must be consistent with your organizational goals and objectives set by the board of directors and the management. And now comes to this particular stage, which where we state that there is no such thing as IT risk. Yeah, there's no such thing as IT risk. Because if you are looking at IT risk, it must support the business goals and objectives. And that is why we are talking about alignment of your information technology activities to the business goal and objectives. Any functions taken on by your information technology team that does not align or does not support the goals and objectives set by the management, that activities is none but a waste of resources to the management and to the organization. So when we talk about IT risk, don't forget, IT risk is a sub-risk in the business risk itself. The major risk to the organization is the business risk. So in that business risk, we can now be talking about different risks that can be cascaded that will prevent the organizations in achieving its goals and objectives. So that is why I do tell my colleagues that please take note. There is no such thing as IT risk. Whenever you are designing or probably developing a risk-based plan for your organization, you have to extract it from the business risk. So your IT risk cannot stand in isolation from the business risk. So it must work hand in hand, and that is why we call it a sub-risk to the business risk within your organization. Don't get me wrong. Please don't quote me wrong here. There is IT risk, but there is no such thing that says that it is IT risk without being in alignment with the business risk in your organization. Please take note of that. So when we are now talking about risk, the business risk now that affects your business objectives and goal. Here we are now talking about the strategic, which is being set by the board of directors and cascade that same functions or goals, objective down to the business management. That is from your chief executive officer in your organization. So the strategic is being cascaded down to him that, okay, yes, we want to achieve maybe 5 billion profits after the year. Now for this year. So that is strategic, goal that is being set by the board. Then the chief executive officer, your CEO or your MD, we now look at this strategic goal or objectives that has been set by the board to your management team, and look at how this is achievable by breaking it down into different processes. And that is why we establish different functional processes within the organization. You as an IT auditor, you must understand every business processes for you to identify risk applicable to the information technology area that can prevent the organization from achieving their objectives and goal. Don't forget, risk is being measured, from the IPPF, IAA, IPPF state that risk is a measure in terms of impact and the likelihood, that is the probability that this risk will happen. And if it happens, what will be the effect on the business goal and objectives? So if it happens, how can that prevent us from achieving the goal that has been set by the management and the board? So in a situation whereby you say you identify a risk and there's no impact to the business, it won't affect the business in any way if what you have identified as a risk will happen. And also, if what you have identified as a risk, it has no any likelihood that it will occur at any point in time. So that's things you have identified is not a risk. Take note of it's not a risk. Because the element of risk must involve both the impact and the likelihood. That is, if this thing happens, it will stop us from operating. For instance, if your data center is located where in an area where it is prone to a riot or probably earthquake or fire incidents, so it means that if you fail to put in place some mitigants, some mitigating controls that can prevent that riots from happening, from fire from occurring, so in that case it means that if fire happens, it can affect your data center, right? Or it can affect your business operation from from operating within that same period. And that is why we are going to be discussing about business continuity. And don't forget, you can also carry out an audit in this area, looking at the strategy that has been put in place by your management as regards to your company's business continuity. That is, if your organization made data center is something's impact it disrupt it, how can you fail over to another center, to another place entirely where you can continue operating within a minimum period of time? So this is BCMS, Business Continuity Management System, that can also review in that area. So take note that risk must combine two elements, impact and the likelihood. That is the probability that that thing will happen at any point in time, it must be there. And if it happens, what is the impact? What is the effect? How can it affect our operation from not operating as intended by the management and the board? So let's move on. So we can also talk about financial risk that can happen to your organization, because if an organization is having a liquidity risk whereby you don't have cash to continue your operation, so it means the business can go out of business at any point in time. Then the business continuity or going concern will be put at hold, and as a result, you are going to be out of business at any point in time. Also, reputational risk. This comes in various, in various areas. First, okay, for instance now, if peradventure your organization is not complying with maybe GDPR, for instance, GDPR or probably NDPR that we have in Nigeria. So if you fail to apply these functions within your organization based on the in collecting data of your customers or anybody that visits your organization's website. So if you fail to comply with that, it means that regulatory issue can come in by placing a fine on your organization. You understand? So, or probably if you render a poor services to your clients, or probably you produce a defect product and dispatch this and distribute the same product into the economy where people, your customers, your end users are buying those products and consuming it, but it has effect on their health. As a result, this will result into a reputational damage to your organization. So this is a risk. So we are looking at this strategic, financial, reputational, legal and regulatory and operational risk at an high level risk to your organization. But this identified risk can be actually break down in your operational processes to see how you can block all these things from happening. You understand? So all these things identified here, they are such a risk ranking approach that can be adopted by your organization and utilized in a proper way to mitigate, to reduce the risk that can come on from this particular identified area. Don't forget, risk is measured in terms of impact and likelihood, that is the probability. It means if any of this is missing, that identified items or process is not a risk. Now, as we have rightly said, risk is a natural part of the business landscape. That is, every organization must face one or two risks. If you are not facing any risk, you are not into a business, because risk actually make you strong. The mitigants, the mitigating controls you put in place makes you stand out and help you to achieve your design or stated mission and vision statements. And that is why we said, if these risks are left unmanaged, so the uncertainty, because what we have been talking about, impact and likelihood, is uncertain. It is uncertain that we can't predict when it's going to happen, but it can happen at any point in time, right? So that uncertainty can spread like a wheat fire that will affect your business and disrupt your business activities. But if those things are managed, that is, the risk are managed effectively by putting some mitigating controls in place to reduce the likelihood in your operational processes, your reputational damages, your financial, the strategic, legal, and regulatory, it means you can reduce the losses that can apply to your organization. And by reducing the losses, you avoid a lot of risk that can disrupt your business entirely. And the benefits, that is the profit you target to achieve as an organization, will be achieved. So according to ISO 31100, it defines risk as the effect. You can see it here. As the effect of uncertainty on objectivities. That is, the objectives, the mission, the goal that has been set by your organization, that alone is called the objectives of your organization. That is the intention. But the uncertainty part of it is that at any point in time, what you have identified as strategic, financial, reputational, legal, and regulatory, or probably the operational risk, can come into action. But when it happens, because of the fact that you have already put some things in place, like mitigating control that can minimize their impact on your business objectives, it means your operational processes will be achieved and your set goal can also be ascertained at any point in time. Please take note. Risk is the product of probability and impact. So let's now look at risk assessment process itself. Don't forget, risk assessment is not something you just do now and abandon it there. You do it today or you do it this year, you just forget it that, okay, yes, you have done it last year. Don't forget, risks are evolving. It changes every day. It changes in every structure of our businesses. So it impacts virtually everything at any point in time, at any day. So whenever anything's changed within your organization, you have to measure the impact of what is likely risk that is embedded within the process you are introducing. Because as an organization, you want to continue to operate, in perpetuity. That is, in going concern. As a result, you have to continue identifying risk that can disrupt your business activities and can prevent you from achieving your organizational goals and objectives. And that means that you have to do it continuously. You have to be doing it every time. Either when you introduce new operational processes into your organization, or when you win a particular new business or a project, or probably you just try to get more capital to expand your business. During the expansion, you have to identify another risk that can prevent you from achieving your goal. And that is why we say risk assessment must be continuous, must be ongoing. So how can we achieve that? And how is that done? So you might say that I'm an IT auditor, in which I believe all these processes must have been done by the risk and control department. So it's none of your business, or probably no, they will have done major parts of these activities and just provide it to us. We just look at it again and come up with our internal audit plan. You as an auditor, truly, in a case where your organizations have a risk and control department, they might have done a larger part of this assessment. True. However, as an internal auditor, you are independent of this other function. You are the third line of defense, right? Your risk and control departments are the second line of defense. That is, they are embedded within the process to identify what could go wrong at any point in time, and also identified what could be a mitigating control to prevent the risk they have identified in any of the processes. You as internal auditor or auditor now, you are the third line of defense, right? You are the high of the board of directors in that organization. And that is why we say we have a levels of independence, right? That is, we have a dotted line of control, of reporting line rather, to the management of your organization. You have a dotted line of reporting to them. Why to the board of directors or the board audit committee? You have a direct reporting line to them. So I'm saying that is the standard, right? But I've seen in different organizations whereby you, as internal audit function, you are reporting directly to the management. I mean, your CEO, board of directors, I mean CEO rather within your organization now, and other management function. You report directly to them. In some instances, they will ask you as internal auditor to report to the CFO. It happens. I'm just telling you for a fact, in practicality. However, if that happens, you as an internal auditor, you have to raise a concern as regards to that reporting line. Though you do that diplomatically. Your job as an internal auditor is to call attention of management to some things that might be going wrong, but they fail to identify it. Please don't quote me wrong. I'm not saying you should report that, okay, why will you be saying that I should be reporting directly to the management, to the MD? No, as according to the Institute of Internal Audit Standard, 2024 version, is that we have to report directly to the board of and to the audit committee of the board, and dotted line administrative reporting to your MD or probably to the CFO and the likes. Please do it diplomatically. If it is about writing a mail, but that mail, your intonation in it, let it sound diplomatic, that you observe this. And based on the standard of Internal Audit Institute, states that our reporting line should go directly to the board of director, and then we have a administrative reporting, that is a dotted line reporting to the MD and the management. You understand? So do it diplomatically and you have no issue, because as internal auditor, your independent is not truly independent rather. Take note of it. So let's just move on. So apart from the fact that your internal control risk assessments have been done by them, or your risk department or control department have done all those things, you as an internal auditor, you have to take some levels of review on activities to substantiate what they have done, if it is accurate or not. And that is why you need the understanding of risk assessment in your own job function as well. So the first thing to note, I've said that risk assessment is continuous. It is something that you do continuously within your business environment. Don't stop. That you have done it today, you have done it now, so you can just leave it and continue rolling. No, it's something you continue doing. And how can you do that? The first thing is to understand the company's objective. Like I've said earlier, that your IT risk you are talking about is a subset of the business risk, right? Then the business risk is the risk part that will give you an overview of what the business is intended to achieve and the risk that is going to prevent the organization from achieving those objectives, right? And that is why we said that in the continuation process of assessing risk within your organization, the first thing is to understand your company's objective, right? That's our number one. Then the number two is to identify the key risk areas. So let me just take a example here. You know, as an IT auditor, right? You have identified different IT assets that is being used in your organization, right? And these assets, IT assets, I mean, like application, database, network equipment. We also talk about maybe middlewares, the servers and the likes. You have identified all those things. But don't forget, those things cannot operate in isolation. They are supporting one or two processes in your organization, right? For instance, you are in a financial institution, in a bank. It might be a microfinance bank, commercial bank, tier 1, tier 2, or whichever bank, or you are in fintech. Let's assume that one of your major business process is to disburse loan, right? Disburse loan and take in savings. Now, there's an application, maybe an application called Loan Manager, for instance. So this is an application that powers the processing of loan within your organization, right? Maybe from loan application from customers, maybe through mobile app or internet banking, or there's another platform created by your organization, for them to apply for the loan application. Then you now have maybe your loan disbursement officer that will now come in to assess. Then you now have loan assessments. Now, on this, let's do it this way. At these levels of loan application, your clients or your customers have request for maybe 1 million naira as a loan. Now, at this stage of assessment, we expected your loan disbursement officer to come here, assess what has been provided by the customer. Let's assume that this is a salary loan. It's a salary loan that you have the salary history of your customer that applied for this loan. Because let's assume that the customers have been receiving his or her salary into your bank accounts for the last 2 years. And then from that last 2 years, you are able to, to perform a kind of history analysis on that by knowing that how much is this person earning. That is the net salary that this person is receiving into his or her account on, on monthly basis for the last 2 years. You noted that, in the last 1 year, the salary have increased, right? So that might due to promotion, we need to your client that is applying for the loan. But the net that this person is receiving, maybe, the person is now receiving around 400,000 naira every month. And this person has applied for a loan of 1 million naira for 1 year. Right? Sorry, S shouldn't be there. For 1 year. Now, the loan disbursement officer is here to assess what the clients, that is the salary earner, have provided. You have already maybe you requested for what is it called? The offer letter that this person received. And also because there is a change, in the salary that this person have been receiving in the last 1 year, the person also provided the updated offer letter based on the new salary structure, right? And maybe you also requested for maybe some other information, a reference, that you can be contacted within the organization, like HR contact, and every sort of things that your organization might have put in place. Now, having received all those information, the loan and disbursement officer is to come here to assess. Don't forget, you have a guarantee that there's no way this person will continue to receive his or her salary into this same account, right? You have a guarantee that your loan repayment is sacrosanct, is very certain and fixed. Then you now assess that, okay, this person is earning 400,000, earning 400,000, and then you can be able to, doing the assessment. This loan disbursement officer noticed that, okay, this person has, based on the assessments, can obtain up to 1.5 million for the next 1 year based on your interest, and everything has been added up, right? It means that this person actually qualified for the 1 million is requesting for. Or let's do it this way. Let's look at something that it will be understated. Let's assume that the person is earning 100k and 200k as net, and your loan officer, your loan disbursement officer, identify that this person cannot collected more than 700,000 naira, right? Based on the application. Now, next line, there will be an approval, right? To create a kind of SOD, segregation of duty, between who assess the loan and who approve the loan, right? We are just talking about how to identify key areas within your organization. So when you have already processed it here, you push it. So it went to the approver. The approver person saw 700k and then noticed that the requested amount is 1 million, but we approve 700k based on the risk assessment that you have done, right? And this person also find it very appropriate for them to give this person 700,000 for the first time. So maybe looking at 33% of the total earning, of the total net of 200,000 that the person will be repaying month on month for the next 1 year, so that not to overshock the person, to put a pressure on him, right? So at this point, this person approve. So after the approval, it has to move on to the disbursement unit, which is a separate unit entirely, for them to now disburse this amount into the salary and your client's account. That is, they disburse 700,000, right? So this application, which is loan manager now, have been identified as one of the key applications within your organization. You, as an IT auditor, you have identified it as being a critical application within the IT department, right? Having get that, you have identified the key area, right? Let's move on. The next line of action is to gather information. Gather information regarding this application. What we have analyzed here is that you understood the process of how this loan application manager works, right? So that is the process of gathering all this information from the business owner, from the process owner, for you to know where there is a control gap. Control gap in the sense that let me refer back to this one. We said we are going to have a loan disbursement officer, right? And then we have loan approval officer. Assume that the loan disbursement officer is the same person as the approver. So what do you think is going to happen? Because at the disbursement level, it's just for them to disburse. They have already have it in mind that this loan has been approved by the appropriate management before it gets to them to disburse. So because without approval, it won't get to their own desk for them to disburse the loan into the customer's account. You understand? So if this approval is not there, it means that there will be a control gap in between who approve, who assess the loan and who approve it. And there, a fraud can be created whereby this loan approval person and loan assessment person can also disburse loan, to him or herself. So I'm not saying that that doesn't even happen when we have this control, as in when we have this dual control, but that will happen based on collusion. That is a collaboration between the loan assessment officer and the loan approval officer for them to achieve this. Except if there's another gap that we are not setting on these particular processes now. So all this process that we have identified is for you as an IT auditor to meet with the control owner, the business owner, to let them explain to you one after the other the steps that is involved in disbursing loan to customers that approve and that applies for it. And also you have to understand what are the process for them for the customers to apply for this loan. So do we have web application that they can use to apply for it? Do we have a mobile application that they can use to apply for it? And these two applications, how do they speak to one another? And what is the interface looks like between this application and your core banking application? Because you are in a financial institution now, right? Are there any middleware in between that passes information between the application we have identified? So you have to organize a walkthrough section with the control owner and the process owner for you to have a better understanding, to gather information so as to know where gap exists within the process. If you fail to organize that walkthrough section with them, you might not be able to have a full understanding of the process. And if that happens, it means that you are going to be, having some risk untouched within the process. And that can be, another avenue for the process owner and the business owner that understand the inherent business process in that application, for them to utilize it, to perpetrate any act of, inconsistency within your organization, right? So let's move on. So the next line is to develop a risk universe. So we are going to be discussing about audit universe at later time. Audit universe, and how can you go about that audit universe. So, but for now, let's look at risk universe. That is, you have to understand the risk, the risk that is applicable, all the risk that can affect the business process that I've identified, the critical key areas that I've identified within your organization. What are the risks that you have to know? You understand? So that's why you are saying that when you are developing a risk assessment process, there are so many things you still need to take note of, right? You have to, before you can say that you want to review a process, you have to identify the risk applicable to that same process itself. You understand? So gather all the risk elements that can impact, that can prevent that process in accomplishing the process and the purpose of establishing it. So that is why we are talking about the risk universe. You have to identify all the risk that can applicable to these key risk areas, right? Having identified those risks, we call it risk universe, all the risk applicable to that particular processes, right? The next line of action for you as an IT auditor is to now evaluate and prioritize. Evaluate and prioritize the risk. Now, when we are talking about evaluate now, we have identified the universe risk. That is all the risk that is applicable to that particular key process. For instance, now, in our example, loan manager application, right? So in this loan manager application, you have to evaluate that you have identified the risk that is applicable to this, right? Segregation of duty. You're also looking at cyber attack on those applications. That is the mobile application and the web. The SQL injection can come in, from the hacking perspectives, and there can be a disruption. That is denial service risk, whereby the application will not be available to your customers to apply for loan, and also the application or the website might not be available as well. So due to what, a denial of service attack on your application or probably on your website, and coupled with other risk that's applicable to this particular application. Then you now evaluate. Evaluate means that you have to evaluate that what are the controls that have been put in place on this application. Assuming that you, as an IT auditor, you are not aware, you assume is zero knowledge as regards to the risk or controls that have been applicable or that have been developed or designed along with this application. So you have to evaluate which controls have you put in place. Like the demonstration we did earlier, where we discussed about the SOD, segregation of duty between the loan assessment officer and the loan approval officer. That, okay, there should be a different person in that line. Let's assume that at that your review process, when you are doing walkthrough with the control owner or the process owner, you identify that that SOD is not there. That is a control gap, right? I've identified that, no, strengthening this or putting this here will go a long way, to prevent all those things. And also, after you try to demonstrate to apply for loan using the application, maybe you are using your test environment, for instance, to demonstrate that. You noted that on the web, there is no HTTPS. You get HTTPS was not enabled on your web on the web application, and this actually gives the hacker an opportunity to perform a lot of hacking on that particular stuff, because they are going to use this HTTPS that is not there to to introduce a kind of SQL injection. You understand? So having identified this, you also you don't have this, or probably when that exists, you know that, okay, yes, a certain levels of controls have been deployed on this web application. So evaluate means that you have to assess which of the risk control mitigants have been put in place by the management during your audit exercise. Having identified that, then you prioritize which of these gap that I've identified. Like, let's assume that you don't have SOD, you don't have HTTPS on that application, and also you notice that the SSL certificate that is there, maybe it's still active, but it will be expiring very soon or so. You have identified all this, but you have to prioritize due to resources constraints. You have to prioritize which one is very critical for the management to deploy or to deploy at moments, as in attending immediately after you have identified it. So at that point, you are saying that you have evaluated and prioritized the risk applicable to this particular loan application, right? So then, you have identified risk, right? First, you have understand the organization's objectives and goal. The next line of action is to identify the key areas in which, during our demonstration, we have identified the loan manager application. The next line of action is to perform a walkthrough with the control owner and process owner to gather information as regards to how this particular application works, right? That is, how do your customers apply for loan using this same application? Then the next line of action is to identify all the risk that is applicable to this particular application. That is your risk universe. Then the next line of action is to evaluate those risks you have identified on the application for their appropriateness and effectiveness, and also identify the control gap that's supposed to have been applied or deployed on the application but are yet to be deployed. And then you prioritize those gaps you have identified. You prioritize in the sense that you look at those ones that needs to be implemented immediately, so that to prevent any further destruction to that particular application. Then the next line of action is to develop your audit plan. Because after you have identified the critical areas within the business, you have already identified the risk applicable to those areas of the business processes. You have done your evaluation. You have evaluated the risk that are applicable to those applications. And then you also evaluated the controls to mitigate those risks within that particular application. And later, you identify control gap. Yes, right? Then the next line of action is to develop your audit plan. So in the next slide, we are going to be discussing on how to develop your audit plan, right? Because there's also processes that cascaded down for you to develop your audit plan. So don't forget, as an IT auditor, your audit plan is a subset of internal audit plan. I hope you get that. Your IT audit plan is a subset of the whole audit plan for your organization or for your client. So the next line of action you now to undertake is to operationalize the plan. You have developed your audit plan, right? Okay, for instance now, okay, let me explain something here as per developing the audit plan, or maybe I should explain it when we get there. Because I've worked with different organizations. And one thing I've noticed is that every organizations, or probably it depends on your head of internal audits, adopt different processes of developing an audit plan, right? Or methodology. Let me say methodology, for instance. In my past experience, while working with different organizations, what we normally do is this. At the fourth quarter of the previous year, for instance now, if you are to develop audit plan for 2025, currently we are in 2024, by the fourth quarter, starting from October, November, December, the fourth quarter, we'll be planning our audit plan for 2025. So how are we doing that? We do that based on the previous audit experience that we had in this, based on the identified risk areas. You get? Because we have performed some audits this year. We performed some audits last year, which is 2023. This year, 2024 already, right? And then we have identified some control gaps. That is the ineffectiveness of the control deployed by the management in some of these key processes. So we are like, okay, this process that is giving us issue, that every time we identify control gaps on it, we can't just say that, okay, we should leave that particular process this year and next year and do it maybe, in 2 years' time. That would be a disaster. Like a case of this loan application is being used day in, day out, every day by customers. And from this particular loan application, we are going to be having another report entirely to assess how much loan interest have we generated as a company. You understand? On the loan we have disbursed so far. And this application should be able to give us at a glance how much loans have we disbursed and to how many customers within this year or quarter. So you can easily use the loan applications to extract information that you can use, that can be used by the management to make an informed decision, right? Now, what I've noticed is that in some organizations, they start developing the audit plan in January, the year they want to operationalize it. For instance, now, we want to develop our 2025 audit plan, right? We start January 2025. Because some reason they will say that, okay, the board is going to sit in the, in February, for based on the fourth quarter stuff and the likes. So for me, it depends on your organization. But for me, developing it in the fourth quarter of the previous year will be an idea. So it means that as far back as January 1st, you start to operationalize what you have developed for your audit plan for the year. But in the case where you start developing it, so you start developing it in January the same year and you want to operationalize it. It means that you must have wasted like 2 months within that year So in paraventure, you might not be able to cover some key areas that's supposed to cover because 2 months have gone already. And if in your organization you have to carry out an audit within 3 weeks, so 3 weeks invariably you are using 1 month to carry out an audit, right? So how many audits do you have left that can carry out within that same year? And then you have to also, make provision for leave allowances for your staff because you can't be working all through the year, right? Though that's my opinion. It might differ from your organization, but I'm saying it that for you to achieve an effective audit plan, you have to allow your staff to go on leave. They have to recharge. They have to relax their brain. The audit you are carrying out, you use your brain, right? And then that is your energy. But in a case whereby you don't allow your staff to go on leave, at the end, don't be surprised. They will be redundant because the refreshment part of it is no more there. You understand? So operationalize the plan simply means that you start to operationalize what you have developed for your audit plan. For instance, if by February you are saying that you have to carry out a database audit, right? In that February, you start carry out your database audit. So if you have already scheduled that, okay, in August you are going to carry out user access control audit, then you also start doing that during that period, right? Operationalize means that you start performing the audit according to schedule that have already developed and approved by the management. Because your audit, you can't start carry out an audit without being approved by the management. So apart from the past, okay, here we are just talking about how we do it, how we carry out, audit plan, yeah, right? But when it comes to operationalize, immediately your audit plan is being approved by the board of director, you have to communicate it to the management that is involved. If you are in a group company, just like me now, I'm in a group company, so you have to communicate to the subsidiaries that you have to be audited. You understand? And you have to also communicate that there will be an email communication based on the approved plan to all the head of the unit that is auditable within that same period. You understand? And by the time you are starting operationalizing this particular audit plan, you have to also give them a notice. That is audit notice, right? You have to write them. So it depends on your own SOP. That is internal audit SOP that you have within your organization. If you are to give them a notice of 24 hours before you start, 48 hours, 72 hours, 5 days, a week. So it depends on your SOP, right? So you have to give them that notice and also schedule an opening meeting with them. I'm talking about the standard that has been established by IAA, right? You have to communicate to them and then schedule your opening meeting. Then organize walkthrough section with them to understand the processes. And when you gather the information, you want to understand more, schedule a walkthrough with the process owner and the control owner for you to have a better understanding as regards to each of the processes. Though this is easier said than done, right? We have some IT team or the audit clients that their notion is that you are there to win-shunt them as an auditor. Maybe that depends on the approach you adopt, in treating them as human. I'm not talking about as an audit client now, as human, as you as an auditor. As an auditor, you have to create a cordial relationship with your client. That is only when you can be able to obtain a vital information that will assist you in discharging your responsibility as an IT auditor. Even as an auditor as a whole. But here, just because you are in IT Auditing Masterclass, I'm saying that using IT audit scenario, right? So, and don't forget, it's one of the skills that we discuss, interpersonal relationship, in our first series that you must have. You can't just say that, okay, you have noted an exception. You just throw it to them, bam. Try as much as you can to deep down obtain further information as regards to what you have noted as an exception. When you obtain further information and you obtain your audit evidence, there is no way they can counter what you have identified as a risk. They will surely accept what you have identified as an exception, and even abide with your audit recommendation in order to close that particular audit gap. But in a case where you create enmity that no, I'm there to take this job from you. By the time I raise like 10 exceptions against you, I will just ask management to sack you because you are incompetent. No, even if they are incompetent as a staff that you have known, it's for you to guide them as an IT auditor with your recommendation on what and what needs to be done, because that shows that you know your job, you have a better experience, and also you are up to date as regards to what you do in your day-to-day operation as an IT auditor. You get? So you start operationalize. When you operationalize, it means that you have to develop your audit program, the testing procedures, because in your testing procedures, you have to evaluate the design of the control, right? Then you also design your audit program to examine the implementation of the controls. You test the control effectiveness. And that is only when you can be able to ascertain that the control design and the implementation is defective. And as a result, you identify a kind of ineffective control, right? Then you come up with your reports, right? Reports now state that, okay, you identify this control gap due to the faulty design. Maybe there's no policy that guide the process. For instance, maybe access control, granting access control. Like, okay, let's use this, our loan application, loan manager application as an example again. On this loan application, we discussed about loan assessment officer, right? That assess the loan before it goes to the loan approval officer. So these two officers needs to be created on this loan management application, right? During your review of user access control or user access management on this particular application, you notice that some staff who are not loan assessment officer or loan approval officer were granted access to this particular application. Or probably they are not loan disbursement officer who are granted access. And based on your own review, you notice that their job function does not require them to have access here, right? That is an unauthorized access. You get? So, having identified this, what would be your own suggestion? Because before you can be able to identify these controls we are talking about, there will be IT governance. IT governance in terms of policy that has been established by the organization, right? So, what does your policy state as regards to who should have access to this particular loan manager? And apart from the policy, there must be an SOP, standard operating procedure, right? Like user access metrics. So this matrix will shows that, okay, this process owner should have this access to this application. This is access that so and so department can have. This is access and so department can have on this application. So if you have this access metrics in place, you have user access control policy in place, you also have password management policy in place. So when you review all these things for appropriateness, first, the policy might not be adequate, right? If the policy is not adequate, you as an auditor, you benchmark it against the best practices, that is IT best practices that we have. You can use NIST, you can use ISO 27001 ISMS, and you can also use CISS control to benchmark that, okay, no, according to this policy, it's not detailed enough. It's supposed to have these so elements based on your review with best practices. And the SOP, when you look at this user access metrics, you notice that the person you saw, maybe let me say security officer, for instance. Security officer, I'm not saying that information security officer. I'm saying security officer. Maybe a security officer at gate post. You're now seeing his name and access to this particular application, right? The first thing you have to establish is that on this user access control metrics, is their department or unit stated that they can have access to this particular application. Ordinarily, looking at it from the glance, this person shouldn't have access to it, right? looking at it. But if the user access control metrics and the policy supported that, you as an auditor, the next thing to do is to evaluate what is the essence of giving them access. What is the function of security officer doing on loan management application? You get? So you have to evaluate before you can come up with your recommendation. So your recommendation should be operationalized, as it should be operationalized in the sense that it should be something implementable. Not that you just make a suggestion based on your emotion. You have to analyze everything based on standard. What does IT framework state about this? What is the standard says about this? What is the security control says about this? What is the policy supposed to be and what it is currently? So your suggestion, your recommendation as an IT auditor should be around that area, whereby management will derive an additional value from your services. And these are what you have to state in your reports. Don't forget, I don't know the template of kind of report you are using, but one thing you should note is that whenever you are coming up with audit reports, your report should contain certain elements, regardless of the format you are using. Maybe later, along this course, we are going to be discussing about audit templates and how to write audit reports, if time permits. And I will try my best in that regards as well. So one thing you should note is that there should be an observation, right? That is, audit observation. Majorly we call it exceptions, right? Having gotten this is where you are going to state your audit observation. Then there should be a root cause analysis. What is the root cause of this observation you have noted? Thereafter, there should be a risk implication. Risk implication of what you have noted. Because having an observation is not enough. You have to state what actually led to that observation you have identified. Whatever you identify, don't forget, is a risk gap, right? Then after, you have to state what could be the implication of what you have noted to the organization. You get? And thereafter, you have to state, it depends. If it's something that involves a financial value, you have to state what is the risk value. You get? But mostly when it comes to IT auditing, we base our understanding on the risk observation, the root cause, right? The risk implication, then the risk rating. The risk rating in the sense that you are talking about the high, low, medium, as well as what? Low. In this case, you have to rate the risk based on the priority that you have assigned to it. Then after that, you have audit recommendation, right? That is why you said you have to start to analyze what could have gone wrong before you notice this observation. So your audit recommendation should be tailored toward your risk root cause. I don't know if you get my points. When you have identified a risk gap, right? You identify what could be the root cause of this gap. Then you put your implication on it. What could go wrong? Then risk rating based on the priority, that is the key area you have identified. That is, you are looking at the impact and the likelihood of this risk. That is, if it's now occur, the implication to the organization, is it something that is large, or that's something that is minimal, or something that is critical? That's why you have to identify the high, medium, or low. Sometimes we have critical. In some instances, we have critical, we have high, we have medium, and we have low. And thereafter, your audit recommendation, right,
should be tailored toward the risk root cause, because the root cause is the gap that leads to this to happen. And then your audit recommendation should be something that's, a recommendation that should be able to close the gap, which is the root cause, that will now prevent this audit observation from reoccurrence. Then after that, you have to have the management response, right? That is the audit client response here. Then don't forget, one thing I've noticed during my career activities is this, and I don't want you that are just trying to understand the IT auditing space and or auditing in the entirety to make that same mistake. Always put a regularization period or expected target date for regularization at the end. Let them give you a date. So this date will help, to carry out your follow-up audit. You get? Because you can't just carry out a follow-up at any time you want. They will have given you date that this identified gap, before they can close it, they need additional resources to be approved from the management. And if that is needed, it means that they can't just carry out an implementation to close that gap immediately. The management needs to approve additional resources for them to deploy it, then carry out your audit recommendation on it. So as a result, let them give you target dates. So that target date will give you an opportunity to be able to carry out your follow-up audit. Right? So after you have done your reports, you also perform kind of ongoing monitoring. In this ongoing monitoring, that is where you are talking about follow-up audit, right? Because in your ongoing monitoring is to ensure that what you have identified as a risk is being closed and the occurrence does not come into place again. So using your follow-up audit and also subsequent audit in that same critical area will also give you an idea as regards to what you have identified. Does it still exist or it has been closed? And that is what helps when it comes to perform an ongoing monitoring, right? Then, when we talk about risk assessments, what we talk about is that it should be a continuous process, right? So you continually to reassess this same risk. So please take note of this risk assessment cycle, how it moves, and how you should be able to carry out that assessment, you as an IT auditor, without placing much reliance on your internal control and risk department on what they have done. But don't forget as well that within your organization, there should be a CSA, that is control self-assessment, that is being carried out by each of the functional units you have within your organization. So what the CSA does is this. In that CSA, it's just like a risk assessment document, whereby every control owner will identify the risk that is applicable to their environment. And also, they will tell you what is the mitigating controls they have put in place. If there is mitigating control is not feasible, then there will be a compensating control that they have put in place to ensure that the risk they have identified can be minimized, right? So if this practice is subsisting or exists within your organization, trust me, that will go a long way to give you an idea on what risk is applicable to virtually every department you are auditing as an IT auditor within your organization. Don't forget, risk is the product of probability and impact, right? And then, like I've said earlier, a technology audit risk assessment is a component of larger enterprise risk assessment system within your organization or your audit client environment. So your risk assessment should be a subset of the risk assessment of the ARM, that is Enterprise Risk Management System within your organization. So let's move on. I hope, please, if you have any question on what you're expecting me to explain here, but I failed to do, please drop a comment. I will do a justice to that and give you a reasonable response. So let's move on. Here we are just trying to briefly discuss about type of risk that we have, right? Under this particular area, we are going to be discussing about three types of risk: inherent risk, control risk, and detection risk. Although we have audit risk, right? Audit risk is the failure that all these identified risks, the inherent, controls, and detection risk, is not being identified during the audit process. But inherent risk means that the risk that exists within the business without any application or deployment of controls to mitigate it. So in a nutshell, inherent risk is a gross risk, is the total risk that is applicable to your business without applying any risk mitigant to it. But when we are talking about control risk is a risk, is a risk measure deployed to reduce the impact of the risk that is inherent with your business. You understand? But what it actually means is this: risk that internal control fails to prevent or dictate. But what you should know about control risk is the risk that is being deployed to reduce the inherent risk within the business. But if the control risk now fail to identify any risk, any risk, or to prevent it, or to dictate it within the organization, it means that there is a control failure, control risk failure, right? And when we are talking about detection risk refers to the risk that internal audit fails to dictate or prevent risk during the audit period. So, in a nutshell, the audit risk or the total risk, the audit risk rather, is when all these risks are not being identified and prevented when you are doing audit. So, detection risk, that is how to mitigate all this risk now. So, under the gross risk, which is total risk, in a case whereby this exists, the next thing to do is to deploy a controls to reduce the inherent risk, right? Inherent risk is the risk that comes with the business. But for you to reduce that inherent risk, you have to deploy controls, put some controls in place to reduce the impact of that risk from occurrence. The control risk, we have said that risk of control failure, right? That is, the control fail to identify or dictate risk or prevent it from occurring. So what you need to do is to perform an internal audit to reduce the risk. Because the control, which is the day-to-day activities within the organization, fails to identify it and prevent it. But the only risk that can now prevent it is to perform an internal audit function on that process to identify the risk and prevent it from occurring. Don't forget, the primary function of an internal auditor is to dictate or prevent risk. Is for you to do what? To express your opinion, your independent opinion on the risk deployed by your organization as per how effective is that control. How effective it is to prevent and dictate any errors or risk or fraud within your organization. But internal audit itself, the primary function is just to express an opinion on on the effectiveness of internal control, not to dictate or prevent fraud or risk. Because you are not part of the process. What is a part of the process is the second line of defense. Your second line of defense, which is the what? Internal control. So if the internal control now fails, the next thing to rely on is internal audit. Because if internal audit functions, that is IT audit function, is now being carried out, you can identify that, okay, yeah, you have unauthorized access within this particular software, this particular application or underlying infrastructure. Why did the internal control fail to identify that? So that is only way you can be able to minimize the control failure, right? So risk of internal audit failure now, that is, if the internal audit fails, Then what you need to do to prevent that is that you have to conduct risk-based audit planning, just like what you have explained. Then review the internal control system. Because you, as an internal auditor, carry out an audit, it means that when you identify a control gap, you have to recommend to strengthen that control, right? And that's what we are saying here. Review the internal control system. When you have already carried out your review, you identify the control gap. And when you identify that, you make a recommendation to strengthen that internal control function. Then thereafter, we talk about select an appropriate statistical sampling, right? So mostly, when it comes to sample selection, except if you are in a consulting industry, mostly that I've observed so far, because during my internal audit function, I've not seen any organization that has a tool in-house that can use to select a sample statistically. What I have seen is that you use a judgmental level that, okay, let me use based on the amount. Okay, let me use based on the criticality of that particular asset. But using a statistical method to identify, you know, to select your sample, I've not seen that. But recently, there's one application, is an online base. They call it randomizer.org. So this randomizer can help you to select a sample. But one thing you should note is that before you can use randomizer, you must have attached some additional information to the audit evidence, or to the IPE. That is IPE. When we talk about IPE, we talk about information provided by the entity. Mostly we use it in consulting industry, whereby information that is being provided by the company that you are auditing to you to use to perform your audit evaluation or examination. So mostly you, as an internal auditor, for instance, if you have a data that speaks to username, the full name, the function, and so on, but you want to use randomizer to select your sample, for testing on this data that you have obtained from your audit clients. So you can come here and have a serial number, right? You attach serial number to each of these lines. Then attaching serial number means that you have 1, 2, 3 to the last number. When you attach that serial number, you can now select. Don't copy this information into randomizer. It might lead to data privacy issue, right? As an auditor, you have to be cautious of that. Whatever tools you are using, don't provide your clients or your organization information to a public application. Take note of that, please. After you have identified, let's assume that the number is from 1 to n. Our n is 200 now. So you have 1 to 200. This 1 to 200, you can actually now take it, that 1 to 200 into randomizer. If you go to randomizer, it will ask you from 1 to number what. Then it will now ask you how many samples do you want to select. Maybe for instance now you want to select 25 samples from this 200. Then you now put that into randomizer. Please, you can learn more about randomizer online so that we don't waste much of our time here. So by the time you input that, okay, you need 25 samples, the randomizer will pick it using statistical method to select for you a 25 number from this serial number. Then you now trace it back to each of the line, that which one fall into the line the randomizer have returned back to you, right? So you can be able to use that as your sampling techniques, right? So then assess the materiality of the processes or systems in the audit scope. Don't forget materiality, right? Materiality is something that can distort the decision maker of the information or of the data you are examining. So mostly in the financial audit, so materiality, they benchmark it on value, right? That, for instance now, if something goes wrong within an organization that is earning 1 trillion, and then you now have maybe a misstatement or something relating to maybe 50,000. You see, this is not material. Even it doesn't fall under the clearly trigger, you know, and then we have performance materiality as well. So mostly materiality is something that can distort decision maker in making an informed decision, right? So having identified all these controls, types of control that can affect, that can prevent your organization from achieving their organization objectives and goals, then you now have a risk response methodology. What does it mean? Risk response is the process of dealing with a risk in order to minimize or to reduce the impact of that risk to your organization. And that is what we call risk mitigation control, right? That is what you can use to reduce the impact, the likelihood, the impact, and the effect of control failure on your business processes. So it is crucial steps in the risk management process. Here are the four primary risk response methodology that is very commonly known today. We have risk mitigation, right? Take some action to mitigate or reduce the risk. And that is why we are talking about the fact that, for instance, on every application today that is publicly accessible and is a very critical application to your organization. And that is why, in most instances, and based on best practices, we recommend that you have to deploy MFA on it. Apart from the password and username that you use, there should be additional layer of control, which is MFA, multi-factor authentication. So this multi-factor authentication means that it doesn't mean just your code. You understand? So it might be a various forms of authenticating that you, the right user, is the one that is trying to access this application, right? So what it means is this. Today, we have a lot of them. We have applications that you can use. We have Microsoft Authenticator. We have Oct. And we have many more of them. And you can also have this multiplication authentication being deployed via your email, whereby you receive a code via your email, or you receive an SMS code on your phone for you to impute to serve as an additional layer of control, right? And also, we talk about risk avoidance. This means that, for instance, now you have identified some risk that this risk will totally disrupt your business if you continue the same manner you are. So the best approach is to change your business strategy and process to avoid the risk. It doesn't mean that you won't do anything, but you just change the business strategy now to ensure that you alter the risk to the extent that it won't affect your current strategy or business processes. Then thereafter, we have risk acceptance, whereby you accept the risk as it is. So most times, as our risk manager, they will say, after you have already assessed risk, and the cost of mitigating the risk, let's assume, is 500 million. That is the cost of mitigating the risk, right? And you now look at the cost of mitigating the risk and the risk itself, and what will be the what will be the impact to your organization. So you look at this 500 million that it's not possible for you to implement this within your organization using this maybe a tool that has been identified as this. So the management or the board might just decide that let's just accept this risk the way it is. So when it happens, it can affect us more than this, rather than now using, rather than using 500 million to mitigate it. So they have looked at the impact that's at the bottom line, they are still fine. So using this a huge amount to mitigate it, my result, so let's just accept the risk. And then also we have risk transfer, whereby the risk is much for you to undertake as organization or management. Rather, you transfer the risk to a third party to manage for you. And that's why we have insurance services today. You understand? So we have insurance services whereby you can use. Even today, now, I think we have cybersecurity. We have insurance for cybersecurity as well. That if this cybersecurity happen, of this particular risk in related to cybersecurity happens to our organization, we are transferring this risk to you. And how much will be our premium? You continue paying your premium. So by the time the risk applied, because of the amount involved, you cannot implement it by yourself. You transfer it to a third party to manage for you. Then if it happens, you can be replenished back to your former position before the risk and before the risk occurred. So with that, you are trying to transfer the risk based on the fact that you don't have capacity to shoulder it into another third party. So I believe what we have discussed here is very, clear to us. But in a case where you have any question, please don't hesitate to drop it in the comment section. I will try my best to attend to them and get back to you. Thank you. So let's move on. Here, we are just trying to, brief ourselves to understand what is known as vulnerability and threats. Because I've met with our aspiring IT auditor or cybersecurity professionals that actually interchange these two terminologies for one another, or probably misunderstand the contents of each of these two terms. So let's just brief ourselves. One thing you should know is that vulnerability is a weakness in a system. Vulnerability is a weakness in the system. For instance, in your system, you have what is called a server. And your server from the OEM, that is original equipment manufacturer, they deploy month on month, like Microsoft, month on month, they deploy patches, right? Just to mitigate and reduce the impact of identify risk that comes with the servers you are operating. It might even be a database, it might be an application. So I'm just using server as an example here. So these patches, you are in the control to deploy the patches to reduce the risk that is applicable to this particular server infrastructure now. But in a case where you fail, because OEM month on month, I think every Tuesday, very first Tuesday of the month, they deploy the patch, and it's now left for you as management in your IT department to deploy these patches. Before you deploy, then you are going to be talking about change management control, right? Whereby you have to test it on your test environment. Microsoft has something called SCCM, whereby you can use to deploy all these things automatically to all the end users on your network. So you have to test it on your test environments, ascertain that it introduced no issues. Though there is another patches that is being released by IEM, OEM, which is Microsoft. They call it no known issue. So this, most times, you just deploy because they have already tested it series and it's introduced no issue into the environment. But what is applicable is that you have to test it in your test environment, obtain the reaction. What could be the reaction of this particular process you are testing? And after you have done that, then before you can deploy it to your production environment. So you as an organization, you are in control of releasing these patches every month after it being released by the OEM. So in a case where you fail to do that, you create a weaknesses within the system, and that is what we call vulnerability. I hope that is clear. So, but this weakness is now, don't forget, as an hacker, right? If I want to hack your organization, I will just look at the weaknesses that exist within your system. For instance, on your server, I've seen that the patches that was released by OEM in the last 3, 4, 5 months or a year has not been deployed within your organization. I will just perform a kind of scan, and it will identify all the application, all the servers you have. Then from there, I can now see that, okay, yes, this has not been deployed. Then as an hacker, I will go back to the OEM platform, look at the risk that is embedded in each patches that has been released. Then try to perform a kind of recognizance and identify the tools that I can use to exploit this vulnerability that exists within the patches. That exploitation is what is called threats. and that threat is outside your organizational control. What is in your control? Okay, yeah, I think it's there. What is in your control is vulnerability, but this is not, the threat is outside your organizational control. And that is why you have to ensure that the patches deployed by by OEM to the application you are using, to the server or other infrastructure, even network equipment included, and databases, you have to ensure that you deploy it to prevent exploitation from the external parties. Vulnerability are mostly internal elements, like I've discussed, and this is external because it's outside your control. And an example include weak coding, right? Missing antivirus, weak access controls, and then not deploying patches. And then here, under the threat, we have hackers, malware, criminals, and this. So this hacker will have performed a lot of things, trying to fish maybe your management or other staff within your organization. You understand? So these are what is known as vulnerability and threats. I hope this is clear. Please, if you have any question regarding this, just drop it in the comment section and I will attend to it. I believe with this, we should be able to understand what is known as vulnerability and threat. Then, here, we are now going on to perform the risk assessments. And what are those area parameters that you have to take care of before you can come up with your audit universe? So the IT risk assessment, requires application, right? Infrastructure, technical knowledge, and understanding of the organizational IT environment. Like we have discussed, the first line of action is to understand your company objectives. And the next is to identify the key process area. And after you have already done all those things, the next line of action is to now have your audit universe. The audit universe in natural sense or in simple sense means all the auditable area within your organization. So here you can see we have our technology audit universe, right? So what are those elements that you have to take into cognizance? Like inputs and the other business areas that you have to take cognizance of before you can be able to arrive at your total audit universe, for you to identify the key processes or the key or critical applications within your organization. We have our service quality, the service we are rendering as an organization, the architecture complexity. So here we are looking at the complexity of your organization or your application that you are using. I think we use Loan Application Manager as an example, right? So here in your organization, having identified the architecture complexity, this is as regards to the business strategy, right? Here you have your CEO, CIO, CFO. Like I've mentioned, CEO, your chief executive officer, your chief executive officer. Then you also have your CIO, which is chief information officer. You have your CFO, chief financial officer. The CMO, chief marketing officer. CRO, chief risk officer. CISO, which is your chief information security officer. The CDO, chief data officer. Then you have AC, audit committee chair, that is audit committee chairman. Then we have CAE, which is chief audit executive, right? All these people, they are the business strategy decision maker, right? So having identified this, their own strategy and governance will come from the perspective of IT strategy. How do they determine or decide to use information technology within the organization to power or to power their own processes, that is the operational processes? Like the example we made earlier, loan manager application, right? That is being used to process loan. So they have identified that they have to integrate their processes of loan disbursements into an application. And this application, it requires what? IT infrastructures like database, server, middleware, networks, application, and the likes. At this level, because it's a governance level, right? Like I said earlier, that board of director will have identified the goal and objective of your organization. And the management that formulate the business strategy for your organization will now come up with different series. IT strategy, they have identified this. The strategic initiative, like what I've discussed about loan manager application. The IT governance, this will come from the perspective of policies that your management will have established. That you, as an IT auditor, if as an IT officer, when you are carrying out any changes on our IT infrastructure, don't hesitate to follow our change management policy, right? Ensure that you test it in test environments. Look at the reaction before you deploy to what? To the production environment. Then you also have SOP that your department, IT department must have established, right? Then you now have plan, prioritize, and collect and allocate. Then management are the one that allocate resources to different units, right? From portfolio management, based on what you want to establish as a project within your organization. Then they look at finances, because for you to carry out a project, it requires a finance, right? Then the human capital that is going to be managing that project. Then what are the talents that needs to be acquired for this project to be successful? That is, who should be in charge. You have to get a staff that will be managing this particular project. So we are just using this as a kind of business strategy decision making process that can be adopted by your management in your organization, right? So here we define requirements, the design, and build. After the project has been, approved, the likes, management have, okay, yeah, this is the IT project we want to have. We want to have our loan manager application to power our loan processes, right? Then the project, that is the project now. Then the management technology acquisition. You have to acquire the necessary IT infrastructure, maybe the application from third party, or you build it in-house. It depends on you. That goes based on management decision. Then the infrastructure that will power this application, you have the server, you have the DB that is going to power it. If you need middleware, and then you also need some segregation of network in terms of network equipment that you are going to adopt. You understand? And the decision will also come around how this application should be accessed. Do you want to restrict it to the local network, or probably even if you want to access it outside the network, you have to use VPN or something of sorts. This is a business decision to be making by the management. However, the IT team will have come in here, and let me say something here also. As an IT auditor, please don't run away for job. You can be involved in every management process without compromising your independence. What do I mean? If management has commissioned a project that involves IT processes, you as an IT auditor, you can be part of the committee or part of the review committee that when they are developing the sketch of this particular application, you can be able to identify where controls needs to be implemented in the process without waiting for when the project has been deployed and you are now testing the application based on what is known as post-implementation review. When you are waiting for that, some things might likely happen. Control might be missing at the implementation stage. And the second part will be that you have to engage the vendor to implement the control after the project has been completed. And that means that additional resources will be required. You have to pay the vendor because it was not part of the project initiative idea. It was not part of the project design right from beginning. So as a result, you have to pay the vendor additional fee for them to do that for you. You see? So if you are involved at the initial stage of the project, it means that you will be able to identify some control gaps, implement it. You are not the one to implement, but you identify for them to implement to prevent the organization spending extra amounts in deploying the control after the project has been completed. However, you are not there in the committee to implement. You are just there to review and make a suggestion. And that doesn't mean that you are not going to mix some control gaps But the major and the critical gaps will have been identified at the initial stage, and that will have been prevented in the project initiation process. And this, you operationalize the project, right? You have change management. That is why you are saying that the policy that has been deployed by the management at IT governance process. The change management, whatever you want to change, you have to follow the process, right? Manage service delivery, manage the resiliency of that particular project, of the application now. Because it's a loan manager application, which simply means that a lot of people will have been accessing this application externally. What it means is this: resiliency, in the sense that have you gotten a server that can ensure that no matter what number of customers is coming or using that application, it will never throw up an error or probably log out users unnecessarily. So the service, the server you need that will accommodate that, the database to withstand the resiliency of the traffic on that particular application. You understand? So manage information security. That is, because it's an web-based application, right? You have to carry out a kind of security check, information security check, day in, day out, to ensure that any risk or any weaknesses, that is, vulnerability that may exist with the application, maybe patches has been released, but we are yet to deploy it. So all those things will be identified timely and deployed to mitigate any threats that can occur. Then after, we talk about manage IT infrastructures. That is, you continue to manage accesses to all this infrastructure. That is, who have access to them. Any unauthorized access needs to be yanked off, and any staff that have access to it, whenever they exit the organization, you have to disable their profile on the application. Then manage vendors, because sometimes it might be a vendor that is managing this application for your organization. What you need to do in that case is that you give them access, right? But the access will be temporarily disabled when they need no access to that particular application. I have seen an instances whereby, the initial vendor's access to the application was just left unopened, which is a privileged access. So when I was carrying out a review, so I noticed that the vendor is still providing a support. It's not a vendor default password profile now. I'm not talking about the default administrator password and username on servers, on database that come from Microsoft. I'm talking about an application that is being developed by a vendor for us, and it's not being owned by the vendor. So it is a third-party application anyway, but being deployed and implemented for us by a vendor. So I now notice that access still exists. So the first thing I have to check is that when last was the profile used to access the application. I noticed that it has been a long period. So my suggestion to them, like audit recommendation, is that this profile needs to be disabled. And whenever they request for access, they have to request either through our form or they send a mail that they need that access. And immediately they are done with whatever they want to do in terms of support to us, you disable it again. And anytime they need it, they also come back to us and request. So with that, you should be able to control. Though the organization currently does not have a PAM tool, that is privileged access management tool, that can be used to manage all the privileged access. So, but looking at mitigating, compensating control that can be used, so I make a suggestion as regards to that. So, managing data on the database and also managing compliance. So, these are just a strategic business decision, right? Then also, when we now come back to the business strategy decision, we look at the data integrity, right? Don't forget the our CIA triad: confidentiality, right? Integrity and availability of that particular information. So your integrity means that you don't allow unauthorized access to alter or modify the information that reside within the application or the IT infrastructure, right? The data integrity is very key, right? So also volumes of program changes. So you look at this, how often did they carry out that? Then you look at cyber threats and privacy that may occur to the application, to the critical processes within your organization. Look at availability, as we mentioned in CIA triad, and the volumes of users. Who are those users that have access to that particular application? like example you have cited under the loan manager application. Then the governance, that is how this is being managed, the application. The governance, don't forget, is majorly based on the processes, policies, and SOPs, standard that has been established by the organization. Having taken care of all this information, it formulates what is known as technology audit risk universe. And that cascaded down to the technology audit risk assessment that we have to perform, just like what we have done in the process in the previous slide. So a risk assessment allows auditors to consider how potential events might affect the achievement of business objectives, right? Then we now see that okay, the risk assessment process begins by defining the audit universe. You have to identify your audit universe. It includes all the applicable business units, the processes, the operation, and any other auditable process within your organization. That is what is known as audit universe. I think I've mentioned this in the previous slide when we discussed about the process of carrying out a risk assessment. And then subsequently, after you have already carried out this risk assessment, audit risk assessment, then you come about identifying the critical area, like high risk area. Excuse me. The high risk area must be monitored continuously. Then I think I've mentioned this also, the medium risk entities and then the low risk area. That doesn't mean that all this asset perspective might not be audited, but it depends on the resources that you have as an internal auditor for you to carry out all this function. What you need to do, the risk area that I've identified as high risk must be continuous. It now depends how the process is. Is that is going to be one times in a year, two times in a year, three times in a year for those high risk area to be audited. That actually depends on who? On the resources that has been assigned to your department. Medium. So if you identify that okay, your high risk area must be reviewed twice in a year, then your medium should be also reviewed once in a year. While the low risk area might be twice in a year, and once in 2 years rather. Excuse me. Once in 2 years. You understand? So based on the resources assigned to your department now, you use this to actually identify the methodology you are going to adopt for your organization. And then from there, from all this, you come about what your IT internal audit plan as discussed. So let's move on, please. So here we just look at the funnel. I think we have mentioned about inherent risk, right? That is a risk that exists with your business without implementing any control. So here now we are now saying that we are trying to implement some control, like third-party risk management risk. We identify them, we put some control in places. We look at data integrity risk, data disruption risk, emerging technology, project management, cybersecurity, privacy risk. When we identify all these things, we put some measures in place, right? To mitigate and reduce their impact to the organization. The remainder of this, that is, after we have already put measures in place that is effective now, though the remainder will now be the risk, which is called what? A residual risk. A residual risk is the leftover risk after some levels of controls have been deployed to the inherent risk that come with the business. You understand? So I hope you understand this part. We have already discussed about inherent risk. That is a risk that exists with your business without deployment of any controls to mitigate them. So we are now saying that here we have tried to deploy some levels of control to identify risk within our business environment. So after the deployment of those controls, whatever is now left over is called a residual risk. So this will actually be identified. When we start our Caesar class, we are going to discuss more about this and how to go about what is inherent risk, residual risk, and other form of risk that we are going to be looking at. But for here, let's just stop here so that you'll be able to understand the process of coming about risk. So here now, what are the risk assessment fundamentals? So the initial risk assessment identify the business unit. As we have said, that is the very first thing. Business unit, the processes and all activities that present highest risk to your organization. And we use all these things to come up with our what? Audit program. Audit program, that is which area we need to audited within so year. So when we are developing all these things, so we have a strategic audit plan. When we say a strategic audit plan, we are talking about strategic audit plan. So this might be a 3 years audit plan, right? That is okay. You have already identified all the process to be audited in the next 3 years. For each of the year, for instance, you have 2024, 2025, and 2026, right? This is the 3 years that is being covered under your strategic audit. So the highest business process area that you know that there's no way, like the loan process stuff, it must occur loan, loan, loan in each of the year because it's a critical business area that you can't do without. Then you now look at the other medium area that, okay, how can you do that? Okay, we can do that once in a year or so. But when you look at the low levels area, okay, this can be done instead of doing it in 2024. No, let's go for 2022. Then the next one will now be what? In 2027, which is, every 2 years. You review them. But every identified risk must not be left unassessed. You get? So then you also build your organizational risk profile. So when you build the organizational risk profile, then you have to put some inherent risk and control risk that have identified and their likelihood of occurrences, just like what we discussed in the previous slide. Then hereafter, from your risk profile, then you now present to the management and the audit committee using a color coded. On our heat map, if you have not forgotten, on the high risk we use red, right? We use red to identify it. Our medium, we use amber. And then the low, we use green, right? So that is what we call a color-coded heat map that identify high, moderate, which is medium, and low risk area that can impact your business processes of your organization. So, in a nutshell, here we are now going to the conclusion part, whereby we want to actually come up with our IT audit plan in full. Then the first thing you need to understand is this: understand the risk. When you are trying to understand the risk, you perform what? Risk assessment, right? When you are performing your risk assessment, the driver is the risk. That is what influences your decision about the risk assessment is the risk. That is the high risk area is being prioritized first, then medium, and the low, right? What now influences this is the resources you have available. Is the resources. Resources is the influencer at this stage and not risk under the risk assessment, right? Okay, let's look at some key activities here. So here you obtain explicit input from the stakeholder, just like what we have identified in the funnel. Then also you identify the relevant risk that is applicable to each of the processes you have identified. You assess the risk, that is, what controls have been deployed to that particular processes, and then you identify control gap, and then you prioritize your risk based on the risk level you have identified. But under the allocate resources, you have to also allocate resources to this audit plan when you are coming with your audit plan now. I have told you that the limited resources for your audit department is resources, Abi. Resources in terms of manpower. That is, how many people do you have that can carry out audits? You know how it happens in different organizations, right? They believe that you are a cost center. So why do we need to be employing a large number of people into audits? So few people should be able to do the job. And as a result, it creates a resources constraint for you. So you don't have more hands to carry out the job. You only have few people, and as a result, you have a limited resources. Even apart from the manpower, you can also have a limited resources as per tools to use to carry out your audit. We have ACL that can be used to perform series of analysis. But if you don't have it, you have to use manual process. You use your Excel to carry out all those things. You get? So these are limited stuff that are applicable to your organization, and that is why it is the driver. You have to identify the resources first before you can say that, okay, yeah, which risk do you want to manage? You start from the high risk. So if you have enough resources, then you go with medium. If no more resources, forget the low. That's what we are talking about. And that will now go to your strategic audit plan, like 3 years audit plan. That's whatever you have identified this year. And then you know that high risk have been beat down due to control measure being put in place to medium. And then you don't have any high risk except medium, then you can now try to undertake some of the low risk area you have identified as well in your process. Don't forget, here now, the main driver, what is trigger? What is the main point that you have to use to identify or to come up with your audit plan is the resources that is available to your organization. Then the influencer, it will now be the risk that you have identified in the course of your risk assessment. Under here, understand the universe of the potential audit subjects, allocate and rationalize resources, then reconcile and finalize your audit plan. For instance, if you have 2 staff under your IT audit unit and you have identified like 20 process to review, trust me, you might not be able to achieve more than 10. So don't overstate what you cannot achieve, because at the end, your performance will be based on what was planned and what was achieved. Please take note of that. At the end, don't be surprised that your manager is not promoting you because you identified 20 processes to be audited, and at the end, you ended up auditing just 10 processes. As a result, you might remain in the same position. Please do that judiciously, right? So, summary of this series, third series, is that the following are the advantages of risk-based audit plan. When you have a risk-based audit plan, what it does is that you have effective risk-based audit plan reduces the risk that arises during the audit. Risk-based audit plan is a proactive approach, right, that helps to identify issues at an earlier stage. And also, the risk-based audit plan helps organizations to identify any significant deviations from the contractual and legal requirements. And this helps to improve compliance awareness throughout the organization. The next line of action is that the risk-based audit plan promotes preventive controls over reactive. What do I mean? Preventive controls is a control that have already implemented to prevent, a risk from happening. A reactive is that when the risk have occurred, you are now reacting to it to prevent it, which is not ideal. So what a risk-based audit plan does is that it helps you to identify gaps and put a measure, appropriate controls there to prevent it from occurrence. So the risk-based auditing helps organizations to align their internal audit activities with risk management practices, because your organization must have a risk department. So, okay, let me just try to highlight here. I don't know, your own department might have a combined function. You have the risk, you also have control and audit being combined under the same function, which simply means that the second line of defense and the third line of defense has been combined together. So this is not best ideal combination that should exist in any organization, but circumstances might actually, call for it. It's based on mostly small organization. But if that occur in a big organization, mostly listed organization, then it means that something is going wrong, and the board has to do something as regards to that, because This is not acceptable. There will be a level of compromise. I'm the one performing risk.
So, we also discussed about the risk audit promotes preventive control over reactive measure, right? And also, risk-based auditing helps organizations to align the internal audit activities with risk management processes. So, in a nutshell, as an internal or the IT auditor, when you are trying to carry out your risk assessment, so the first thing is to understand the organization and how IT or the IT information technology support it. Understanding this based on this basic process will go a long way to actually put you on the right path, to know the area to check and what you need to review, and also understand the IT environment and define the audit universe. That is, the complexity of your IT environment, you have to understand it. And that will help you to develop your IT audit universe. What are all the IT infrastructure being used in the organization? Then the network components, the infrastructures, and how intense is your IT environment to support the business processes. These processes actually goes a long way to add value to you as an auditor, and it will help you to develop the IT audit plan in appropriate manner. And also, you have to prioritize your audit subjects through risk assessment, and that's what we have been hammering on. Your risk assessment goes a long way to determine your IT audit plan. Note: IT only exists to support and further the business objectives. IT does not work in isolation, and that must be an alignment between the IT department's functions and activities with the business processes. Then note again, to define the IT audit universe, understand the business process first. You must understand the business process, your IT audit plan, that is going to aid you to add value to your organization. The next line of action is to develop the IT audit plan, assess the business risk associated with the IT, and that will help you to come up with the absolute process to be audited. That is the critical process to be audited within your organization. Please take note of that. And also, another thing you need to note in summary is that the first process is to acquire the pre-audit requirements. And how can you go about that? The knowledge about the industry and regulatory requirements for your organization or for your client's environment is very key. And also the knowledge about the applicable risk to the concerned business. Because after you have already identified the business processes, you must be able to identify risk applicable to them. Then you now carry out your risk assessment and evaluate to prioritize what are the controls that have been put in place on all these identified risks. Then also you prioritize the audit results, and that is why we are talking about the limitation of resources you have as an internal auditor. The next line of action is to obtain information about the internal control. Like I have said earlier, is that after you have identified the control applicable to any processes you have identified as a critical, you must obtain information regarding the control that have been put in place. And that's where you get the knowledge about the control environments and the procedures. Then understand the control risk. Then understand the detection risk. I think we have discussed about the control risk. We also discussed about the detection risk. Then the next line of action is to conduct a compliance test. That is, how can you come about the compliance test? Identify the control to be tested, right? Then determine the effectiveness of the control. How can you determine the effectiveness? It's through testing of those controls that have identified. Either they are appropriate for the risk or not. And that is where you'll be able to identify your control gap, which is the audit exceptions. And the next is to conduct a substantive test. So, on these substantive testing procedures is to identify the process for the substantive testing, right? Then the C, that the substantive tests include analytical procedures, detailed tests of accounts, balances, and other procedures. You might be
surprised that why are you talking about account balances and other procedure. So you as an IT auditor, you also assist the finance auditor if you are in a consulting firm or probably in internal audit function. You help them to carry out integrity tests. We call it GL, that is General Ledger Integrity Test. So maybe when we get to that level, we will discuss more about this. And also, when we are doing a change of application, let's assume a core financial application, you are changing it to another core financial application, maybe due to inability of the previous application to contain the information or probably to present it in the way that is needed by the management due to improvement processes. You are changing the previous core financial application of your organization, you are migrating it to another one, to a new one. The balances in the previous ones needs to be also migrated. And you as an IT auditor, you have to understand what was the procedures adopted by the finance management or the vendor that is doing all this migration, and what lines of GLs are they trying to introduce in the new one, and in the previous one, are they combining a lot of GLs to make it one instead of having like 10 separate GLs. So this understanding will give you a better idea on what you need to look out for when you are testing your GL integrity and the data migration integrity. So here, don't limit yourselves to just like you are focusing on IT infrastructure alone. You still need to you need the understanding of accounting, basic of accounting. You don't need to be an accountant or so before you can be able to do this, but you just need the basic understanding of accounting, like credits and debits. You understand? And how this particular financial application works. So having that understanding, trust me, this will go a long way for you to be a better an IT auditor, because most of the times your job will be speaking to financial, will be actually pointing to the bottom line, the profits that the organization is actually reporting. And that is why you need that knowledge. And here we come to the end of this particular series, which is the third series in our IT Auditing Masterclass. In the next series, we are going to be discussing about one of the key areas that you must be able to understand as an IT auditor, which is called General IT Control, GITC. Like I've said earlier, some instances we can call it ITGC. It's still the same thing, that is Information Technology General Controls, or you call it General IT Controls. So what are we going to be looking about this on this particular section? We are going to be discussing about overview of IT General Controls. Then we are going to be looking at why was the increase in the focus of general IT control now. Because there is a change in the landscape of cybersecurity, and as a result, there is a change that we as an IT auditor has to also adapt to or adopt in our testing of general IT control. And also, we are going to be discussing briefly about cybersecurity, because as an IT auditor, you must also have that knowledge. Then we further to move on to IT risk and relationship to financial information. Like I've talked previously, that why do you need the knowledge of account balances and the likes? And that is where you are going to be discussing much more on that in this series. Then the benefit of effective GITC. Then we also summarize what we are going to be talking about here. Thank you very much. Subscribe to the channel, to my channel, so that by the time I drop any video, you'll be able to get a notification. And if you have a comment, you have something to ask me, drop it in the comment section. I will do my job. I will do my best to attend to them. Thank you very much, and have a blessed week ahead. Bye.